myself, just move this here. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our attendees as well as our speakers who have gathered from all over the region, from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, from the UAE, Jordan. We're really cutting across the board here. And so I want to give a little bit of context to this report. You know, when COVID really started becoming, when it started becoming a pandemic, organizations like us and Wamda started thinking, how is this going to play out on the startup ecosystem? The impact on the broader economy, I mean, there's a lot of numbers going around, but people are talking about an 8 trillion plus impact on the global economy. Huge. I was talking to some people in the UAE. They were saying the advertising market is down 35 to 40% and will not recover its 2019 levels until 2023. We've seen the numbers of unemployed go through the roof. In the United States alone, something like 33 million people have become unemployed in the last 6 or 7 weeks. The numbers are so stark that when the New York Times put it on their sheet, they put the graph at the very top, and then the dates for COVID went down all the way to the bottom of the front page of the New York Times, right? So kind of contextualize that. So millions of people have become unemployed, and of course, this has not hit everybody equally. There is a huge paradigm shift that's happening. It is affecting clearly some of the offline businesses more than online businesses, and some businesses in certain sectors like travel and tourism and entertainment. But many startups that have hybrid business models, online, offline, have also been significantly affected. And we've seen the impact on the Middle East region with the job cuts by Karim. But we saw it globally. According to the New York Times, just in the first few weeks of the crisis, 50 startups had cut or furloughed 6,000 people already. And the biggest cuts are coming from hybrid businesses like Uber, Airbnb, and others. But many startups are booming. We had a webinar with 2 startups in the healthcare and education space, gaming. A lot of these companies are booming. And Triska is going to give us much more a deep dive into the report. But I wanted to contextualize one last piece of context, which is this report is critical because government has been increasingly investing in startups and SMEs as driver of the future economies of MENA. We have a number of government stakeholders with us today, namely Simon, thank you for joining us from Bahrain, Dr. Mazin joining us from Saudi Arabia. Governments around the region have been spending millions and millions hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, on creating funds of funds, on support, on training, on enablement, on improving their ecosystems. And right now, a lot of that is at risk as many of these startups today are fumbling. And so us and Wamda actually independently had the thinking around doing a report to assess the impact of COVID. Once we started seeing that both of us were working on the same thing, we've always wanted to join forces on a project for many years. So we got on a call together. We decided this is a great opportunity to join forces. And we want to help government decision makers, policy makers, investors safeguard all of the incredible progress that has been made in developing the startup ecosystem and the amounts of money that have been invested in these tech startups. So we did a survey of 250 startups across the region. It's the most comprehensive and robust statistical survey out there today on the impact of COVID on the startups in MENA. And we hope that this will help inform policymakers, investors, and ecosystem stakeholders to develop the most impactful startup support programs possible. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Triska. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Omar. So as I'm just going to share the presentation with you guys now. So we did survey 250 startups from across the region. Most of them were based in the UAE with substantial representation from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Lebanon as well. They're spread across the sectors, very reflective of the diversity of the region's ecosystem. Some have done well, like Omar said, e-grocery, gaming, health tech have done pretty well. Others have struggled. Most of the startups, 60% were in the seed to pre-seed stage, reflective of the burgeoning. And because so many of them are so young, about half of them have less than 6 months runway left. 71% overall have seen a negative impact.
Triska, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Did you want to share your presentation?
Am I not sharing it?
No, I don't think so. So just sorry for that interruption. I wanted to make sure that you have your visual aids.
There we go. I was going through it, but I apologize, everyone.
Beautiful.
There we go. Okay, so this is where all the startups are based. I'll start all over again. Majority were SaaS and e-commerce and fintech startups. 60% in the seed to pre-seed stage, so quite young. And because of that, half of them have less than 6 months runway left. The majority, 71%, have seen a negative impact as a result of the pandemic in terms of revenue, demand, and in the extreme cases, they've had to shut down. Most of the startups responded to this survey back in April, and so when they looked at the last 3 months of their revenues, some of them were still showing growth. 20% were showing up to 25% growth, and about 32% were seeing losses already. Most of the impact was on the growth and business development, and that was the result of all the lockdown measures and inability to travel. This also impacted operations, and of course, the economic situation has had an impact on the funding. How startups have responded, the majority have resorted to working from home or remotely. Expansion plans have been postponed. Some have pivoted and introduced new business models or reduced their prices and introduced new offers. Shockingly, 11% have not yet responded to the crisis. I'm not quite sure what they're waiting for. In terms of what can help, what kind of support, investment was the number one, as well as salary reimbursements for employees and waiving of rent and bills. So, to discuss this further, we have on the panel Qais, Sabri, the co-founder and CEO of Eon Dental, who's based in Jordan, Mohamed, co-founder and CEO of MATIC Services, which is a home cleaning marketplace based in Saudi Arabia primarily, Tarek, Kabrit, CEO and co-founder of Seez, an AI-enabled automotive platform based in the UAE. So I'll stop sharing my screen. So let's start with how you guys have responded to the pandemic. Mohamed, if you could tell me, you guys decided to suspend operations. Why was
that? Thanks for having us, guys. So we're a cleaning marketplace based out of Saudi, operating Saudi, UAE, and other secondary countries and smaller countries in the Gulf. Our main market is Saudi Arabia. We clean around 5,000 homes a day back in early March. On March 15, we got notified from the Ministry of Labor to stop operations. Since our service is extremely sensitive, we enter several thousand people's homes on a daily basis, exposing all the stakeholders in the process. This was applied to ourselves, and as well as all our in Saudi Arabia. So we abided by it. A week later, we decided to stop our operations in the UAE because it was the right thing to do to secure the safety of our service providers and the customers' homes and families we were entering. The UAE shutdown the decision was made from our end, although the government it wasn't a must for us to shut down the UAE market, but we thought it is the right thing to do. We value human safety and life over any monetary gains.
But when you did shut down both in Saudi and the UAE, what kind of impact did that have on your revenues?
Oh, we went from a revenue generating company into zero revenue company overnight. And,
so how, in terms of how you came to that, I mean, in Saudi you didn't have a choice, but yeah, how difficult was it to make that decision?
it was very difficult to make the decision, and even more difficult to navigate through it and keep the ship afloat. We're a company of around 200. I have 200 colleagues with me in the company, all of which, a third of which are engineers on the technology side. The rest are among the biggest chunk is working on operations and business development, as well as marketing and financial roles. So it was very difficult. It wasn't as difficult as making the difficult decisions to maintain everyone and keep everyone motivated and focused and give them confidence. You know, I was dealing with uncertainty myself. How would I navigate through that and instill confidence and peace with my colleagues? So, yeah.
With no revenue coming in, did you
with no revenue coming in,
did you reduce the salaries, make people redundant?
So we cut. Yeah, we cut down salaries starting itself equally across the board. We went through various variations of and scenarios of cutting more here, less there. Then we decided, no, let's equally do it across the board. Another measure we took. So the shutdown happened with us on March 15th. By March 22nd, we have jumped into a completely new line of business. We were supporting online groceries in fulfilling their orders. So we had deployed around 500 service providers in supermarkets across Saudi Arabia in a matter of weeks to assist in fulfilling thousands of daily grocery orders being prepared. That brought in some sort of revenue for us overnight, assisting us in the shutdown.
I mean, it's quite different to cleaning services, you know, providing.
Oh yeah.
So
we jumped into a completely new vertical. We had to learn it. We were a massive team, all focused. It's doing good for us today. Of course, it will not be our core. Hopefully, when things start going back to normal, we will focus on our core in the product which we've been leaders at during the last few years in the Middle East. But we will be diversifying several new verticals into jumping into new verticals which in our exposure.
Okay.
Our vertical is very sensitive, right? We're inside your home, so we either come in with it or we leave with something. So it's very tricky.
Qais, I want to ask you about pivoting. MATIC has pivoted. You guys have as well. If you could just explain briefly what you went from to what.
Sure thing. Maybe I'll start out by giving a quick brief about our business so you can have some context. My company is called Dental. We manufacture something called a clear aligner, which is an orthodontic appliance that enables patients to straighten their teeth using custom-made 3D printed series of trays, more or less the invisible alternative to braces. We sell our solution through different channels, B2B, enterprise, and as well as B2C. As you can imagine, our business is. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm getting a message that nobody can hear
You're
me.
here, you're fine now.
As you can imagine, our business was highly affected by the pandemic, especially because we operate in elective aesthetics, which is probably the first on a chopping block when you have economic uncertainty. We were also affected by the closures that were happening in Jordan as well as the different regions. So ultimately, the demand for our product has been dissipating the past few months. We think it's transient. So the first thing that we kind of thought about in response to COVID was to think about how we could think about team health and safety. Because we are manufacturers, we had to make sure that we set up the right kind of sanitary practices, social distancing to make sure that our workforce can come back to the workplace being safe. The second thing we thought about was cash conservation. And obviously, this is the biggest elephant for all the entrepreneurs. COVID is displacing the businesses, runways are becoming a lot shorter, top lines are dissipating. So, we kind of decided to kind of cut paid advertisement, shave off any costs that we thought were not relevant. We we went to the workforce and we started giving discounts depending upon utilization and the new focus that we had for the interim. When it came to supplementing top line, fortunately, we didn't have to go too far away just because we already have different channels and different geographies. So for example, in our B2B business, we had customers in the region as well as other international markets. So we realized that this is a more resilient product line and we should just double down on it. We also started reimagining how our product and our experience is going to have to change given the new reality that we live in. So for example, with the liner, we reimagined that doctor experience and we started thinking about going to larger geographies. We also started thinking about how we could be relevant to support the national and regional COVID response needs. We use 3D printing as part of our manufacturing fabrication facility. So we thought, okay, that's additive manufacturing that allows for you to be hyper-local. So why not utilize some of these competencies to manufacture something relevant to the pandemic? The first thing that came to mind was printing 3D printed components for ventilator parts. And the idea was here to collaborate with the medical sector to help them increase their capacities for ventilators. And we also realized there's another opportunity which had to do with printing the swabs that are being used for the tests. Surprisingly enough, there's a huge supply chain glut, and there's a huge deficit in supply in general. So we realized that we can repurpose part of our 3D printers to print these swabs, and the idea was to pair it with a local manufacturer who's putting together an entire kit. And our goal here is to really help the nation and the region to increase their testing capacities, which we think is super important in order to get ahead of this pandemic and know how to open the economy safely.
Is this a pivot that you guys are going to maintain once the pandemic is over?
I don't think so. Ultimately, this is something in reaction to what's happening on the ground. And to be honest with you, 3D printing these parts makes economic sense today because there's a huge deficit in supply. But in reality, in the next 6 to 8 months, even less, I think that supply chains worldwide will build up capacities to mass manufacture these swabs at a more economical price point. So for us, it's making a little extra money to help us soften the blow right now and to have a double down impact on helping with the problem.
And there's a lot of talk about how, this is probably the end of globalization, manufacturing is going to become more localized. Do you think that's going to be the case?
Well, I don't think to that extreme. If you think about it, the pandemic has definitely shown some flaws in how we operate with just-in-time manufacturing, about optimization that didn't leave any space for any kind of buffer. But I think right now the direction will be, okay, we have to all have diversification in manufacturing, meaning you have 10, 15, 20 suppliers all over the globe servicing us, but also at a country level, each country has to have competency to be able to scale up capacities when needed in times of emergency. But I don't think it's like globalization of international sales or globalization of manufacturing is over. I don't think it's like it.
Okay. Tarek, I want to bring you in now. You guys have really sped up your business development. So tell us, people probably want cars now, but they're not buying them at the moment. So if you could just tell us what's been happening. You're still on mute. There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. We were one of the luckier companies. We had just closed our Series A right before this happened, the month before. So we had $6 million in the bank, which allows us to really, keep our head down and really try and push through this. That said, we've been, very heavily impacted. Like you said, very few people are buying cars now. I don't have the UAE numbers; they're not public, but in the UK, for example, new car sales dropped by 97%. So almost disappeared during March and April. The good thing about cars is once people need the car, they will continue to need the car. So once this thing is over, there is going to be some pent-up demand that people are going to come back and to the market and buy these cars. And you might even argue more so now than before, because people are a bit more weary about the sharing cars or public transport and all of that. Two of our plans were really to launch an online buying platform for cars and cross-border car buying. And our plan was to really, build the products over the coming 2 months and then start to slowly roll it out to multiple dealers. What has happened now in the pandemic is a lot of the dealers, digitization shot up on their priority list. So everybody wants online sales now. So we, I wouldn't say pivoted, but like sort of added another, product line by saying, okay, instead of waiting for the dealers to digitize themselves and then acting as an online platform for them to sell the cars, why don't we actually help those dealerships digitize their car buying process? So we're collaborating with the Dubai government on a few initiatives there, as long as with insurance companies and banks. Buying a car is a complex process. It's not just, you don't just need the payment gateway and delivery and you're done. There's insurance, registration, loans, all of that. So we're digitizing all the steps along that value chain. And, through that, once that is done, we will act as a marketplace for online buying.
Would you say, I mean, this is a question for all of you, that this pandemic has accelerated the digitization of a lot of services and made people think differently or about becoming pandemic proof?
For cars, 100%. I think it brought it forward by at least 2 years, from when dealers were expecting to go digital to where they want it to be right now.
Okay.
I would maybe like to add something. It's definitely the case that we're being catapulted, forward into the digital era. It'd be really interesting to see, though, how these gains will be permanent as opposed to transient. And I guess we'll just have to wait to see and see how consumer behavior will fundamentally change as this pandemic unravels.
I guess one thing that a lot of people would be looking forward to staying permanent is working from home. How have you guys coped with that in terms of your team? And is it something that you're likely to maintain after this is all over? Mohamed, if you want to answer that one. You're still on mute, okay.
Yeah. So we're focused on the core of this. Unlike we're selling a necessity, right? Taking care of your housekeeping, especially for married couples, early newlyweds, younger generation who don't have time to take care of their home. So I believe the service will stay there. The service we're offering. We are de-risking. We're moving away into new services, which focus less on the presence of humans within your home, and more on providing maybe a value-added service to the home that has entrusted us to take care of. So, yeah.
What about the working from home aspects?
So it's funny you asked the working from home. I think I might have missed out part of the question. Apologies. The working from home aspect, we don't really have. We haven't really been affected by working from home as much. I mean, for the last, as far as I remember, we don't really have solid or set in stone working hours. Every team or every sub team has a different way of doing things, getting things done on their own. And I would say a comfortable 30 to 40% of the time spent by my colleagues are not maybe in the office, maybe from somewhere remote, especially people in the field, people looking after our hubs in Saudi UAE. So we didn't really with the working from home aspect. I think we need to justify the rents we're paying, right? So we need to spend at least 50-60% of our time back in the office when things go back to normal. Actually, today we have some of my colleagues joining us from our office in Dubai and in Lebanon and Beirut and in the north. And I think in Poland we also have some colleagues back in office watching from there.
Tarek, you've also got quite a geographically diverse team. How have you managed to maintain the culture?
Yeah, so our team is spread between UAE, Beirut, and Europe. So a large portion of our tech team is based out of Denmark and Germany, and they've been working remotely for a while. So in some sense, this whole working from home, which mostly affected our Dubai team, has been a blessing in that sense, because it brought the company a bit closer together, because before there was a Dubai office and then there was all these individual people working from home. Now we're all in the same boat. So we put more effort actively to stay connected and to talk to each other. One of the things, for example, is we realized we miss out on all these water cooler chats that people have in a real office. So we created some algorithm that matches two people randomly every week, and they have to have a 5-minute chat. That's sort of a way to have that awkward conversation that you wouldn't typically have with a remote team. I have a few other, like perks and tricks like that we try to keep going.
I'm wary of the time and our second panel. So I want to ask the last question to each of you. What is needed to ensure that startups can survive? You guys are lucky enough to have a substantial runway, and but others are not. So what would you urge the governments and the stakeholders to do in order to ensure that entrepreneurship continues? Qais, if you want to go first.
Sure thing. I mean, I'm not going to state anything other than the obvious. Obviously, company startups right now need runway. They need access to cash to maintain optionality, to figure out what they need to do, be it weather the storm or pivot or whatever the strategy they decide to put in place. So access to cash through, for example, government-backed loans, grants, going to existing investors for more cash. Any other way to alleviate the cash burden, so discounts on salaries, deference of taxes. These are things that the governments have to realize they have to support us with, not for 1 month or 2 months or 3, for at least 6 months or so, because it's going to take a while for us to normalize from this pandemic.
I mean, a lot of the governments have announced stimulus packages. Has that translated into help for startups? Mohamed?
Jordan, like for example, in Jordan, the central bank deployed $500 million in soft loans at 2% interest rate, and it was very easy for us to gain access to a portion of that. But again, obviously, it's a local matter. I'm not sure how things are happening in other parts of the region, but for sure, access to cash is the most important thing right now.
Mohamed, if you can give us your take from both Saudi and the UAE and how they compare.
Yeah. Since Saudi is our main market, we've been lucky enough to benefit from some programs so far. The government has launched in end of late March, early April. The program is called Sami, and what this program does, it supports up to 60% of your Saudi payroll for employees in Saudi. Mainly Saudi nationals. Lucky for us, our entire team in Saudi Arabia is Saudis. We hire around close to 30 Saudi nationals. So we've been lucky enough to benefit from that initiative. The other financial stimulus plans launched by the UAE and Saudi, we've explored that immediately as they launched. They're targeted more towards banks and supporting the liquidity with the banks and the players maybe who are dealing with larger lines of credits before the pandemic. So we weren't really eligible to that, and I don't think neither are any of our startups to get liquidity from banks. You don't have to be a startup, so you need 3-year track record with profitability, which is not available with at least any of the startups I know in early stages.
Yeah.
So the stimulus plans which were launched in Saudi and the UAE were targeted towards banks and supporting their lines of credits and real estate and developments and traders. We weren't eligible to any of that. There is a new initiative, might be interesting for anyone with headquarters or operations in Saudi to explore. We've begun exploring it. I don't know much about it yet, but Munsha'at, I received it maybe a few days ago about Munsha'at, who's been super active from the beginning. So they've been reaching out to us nonstop in Saudi Arabia, trying to support us, connecting us with businesses who we might have synergies with. This new initiative Munsha'at has launched covers. I don't know the intricate details, but it helps cover up to 3 years of startup expenses incurred by any startup in Saudi.
Maybe Dr. Mazin can talk about that later. Tarek, what about your experience in terms of getting investment or government support or stakeholder support?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Mohamed mentioned. In the UAE, it's more catered towards SMEs that already have credit lines and debt. For startups, we haven't received anything. One other way, just that, you know, beyond capital, that governments can possibly also support startups is try and help them with a bit of a business development activities. So really open up a forum where startups can come and pitch to government entities their services, give them priority maybe in some form. So, you know, revenue is still important, and you know, anything the governments can do on that front is also helpful.
All right. Okay. Well, guys, thank you very much. We'll wrap this up. Omar, if you want to take over and start the second session.
Thank you so much, Triska, and everybody at Arabnet.
Thank you, Qais, Mohamed, Tarek, and Triska for this panel. I would like to ask Omar, please, and the rest of the panelists, Dr. Mazin, Feras, Simon has already unmuted his cam, to unmute their cameras so we can be all on screen for the next session.
Yes. Great. Sorry, 1 second. Here we go. Thank you to the panelists on our previous session, and also a big thank you to our current panelists, and I'll introduce them. Feras Jalbout from Wamda Investments, Dr. Mazin Alzaidi, the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Ministry of Investment in Saudi, which actually became a ministry not so long ago, right? Part of one of the last restructurings before, or maybe I guess it was during COVID. And Simon Galpin, Managing Director, Bahrain Economic Development Board. Welcome. As you can see, we really wanted to engage the government in this because policymakers have a huge role to play in supporting startups and weathering this storm. So I want to start by asking all of you, from the report, which I think we shared with you yesterday, so I hope you had a chance to look at some of the results. But I think in many ways the report agrees with a lot of our intuitive experience and our empirical experience from talking to startups. What do you believe are the the most critical challenges facing the startups today? And what support programs are your governments or your fund doing to kind of step in and support those? One thing I want to note before we jump in, that Mohamed in the previous discussion highlighted that many of the programs that have already been announced seem to not be targeted to startups because the requirements are overly onerous for these startups. Startups don't have 3 years of profitability or income statement or these statements. So how are you also making sure that these support programs are really targeted to these startups? And maybe Dr. Mazin, if you can tell us about this Munsha'at program covering 3 years of startup costs. This is something I haven't heard of, but maybe something we should take advantage of if it's really there. So maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Mazin, and then we'll move to you, Simon.
Okay.
Okay. First, thank you, Omar, for the invitation and for the report and everything you guys have been doing with Wamda. Definitely, it's been difficult times for everyone. It's a very unique situation that we're in. The government was able to act, talking about Saudi in a very bold way since the beginning, taking a lot of countermeasures and actions to kind of manage the whole situation. One of the things that the government has done has launched these different stimulus packages to support the private sector in general. And it's been launched during the last 2 or 3 months, and every time that the government announced something, we're still looking into what needs to be done, and we're continuously looking into what we're covering, what we didn't cover, etc. I agree. Most of the stimulus packages do not target startups per se, but definitely they could, for example, the lending initiative by Sama and also through Munshaat is one of, there's I think 50 billion over there, and just recently foreign startups are allowed to obtain finance for working capital. This wasn't the case before 2 months ago or less, but still I think we're still working on other initiatives with the government. The good thing that we've noticed is that the government has been very agile during this situation. They've been listening. Capital is one thing, or being able to manage financials during this period of time for startups. But there are other barriers that just rise with the situation, whether in the logistics, the supply chain, with the curfew, etc. And what we've been doing at MISA is that since day one, we've established a coronavirus response center that has been working 24/7 during that time, listening to and engaging with all different investors, whether entrepreneurs or large companies or VCs, what are the issues that they're facing, and through the different committees that the government has put in place, we've been raising these issues, and we've been trying to find solutions and trying to pivot the way and in different ways. So it's been a challenge, but I think.
What do you think is the most promising specific program that you could mention to us, Dr. Mazin? And if you could comment on this idea that was mentioned in the previous discussion about the Munshaat. I know you're not with Munshaat, but you guys cooperate very closely. Would love to hear if there's any insight on that program.
So I think this program was announced a while ago. It might be an initiative, I'm not sure, because there's an initiative coming every day. But there was this initiative maybe more than a year ago or more, that any company that would set up would be able to refund all registration, establishing government fees that they would put in the company to incorporate the company and set it up. I think it's the same what Mohamed was talking about, but there could be other initiatives. There's initiatives every day from different government entities, and I think delaying most of the payments that whether report the tax or even penalties, the government has been delaying even penalties that face some of the businesses. That's I think an important thing. Subsidizing some of the as was mentioned, payrolls for some of the employees, especially the Saudi ones. That's another thing. But the thing, Umar, is it's not stopping here. We're still continuing. So definitely in the next couple of weeks and months, there's going to be more initiatives. It's not going to stop, because I think this is an ongoing process to be able to manage it, because the impact is not just yesterday, today. It's going to be for a while. So the government is working on trying to make this a continuous kind of engagement and process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mazin. Simon, how is Bahrain looking at this? What kind of initiatives have you launched or you have in the pipeline? And I have some a little bit tougher questions coming up on fund of funds, government budget cuts, increasing nationalism, and support for citizens and locals more than a lot of residents. So I want you guys to keep these in mind. I'm going to try to push the answers on these questions a little bit. But Simon, I'll start with you there.
Thanks, Omar. Great to be here, and congratulations on the report. Very interesting. From Bahrain's perspective, I mean, I think in some respects, and it's not unique to Bahrain, the economies across our region have been very quick to act, very nimble, and have put in place both measures to mitigate the risk of the virus, but also support measures to keep particularly SMEs in business and to ensure that they survive through this crisis. So Bahrain's been very fast to act, very fast to test a lot of the population. Nearly 20% of our population now have been tested. And this is giving a lot of the businesses that we're supporting, whether it's startup or even larger businesses, a real feeling of confidence. But when it comes to the relief measures, and it is much more a relief package at this stage than stimulus. The relief is really in the form of subsidizing the complete salary costs for Bahrain nationals if you employ Bahrainis. All utility bills have been covered for 4 months. And a lot of the fees in company registration and so on have also been waived during this period. So it's really about putting in place measures that will just keep SMEs with their head above water.
Okay, great. And so it sounds very similar to what Dr. Mazin was talking about. We're talking about relief from government fees and payments, and we're talking about support and subsidies specifically for the jobs of locals or nationals.
Exactly.
Before I get to that one, because that one is super interesting to me, I want to talk a little bit about the fundraising environment. I want to engage Feras in this and ask us all together. When we look at the statistics from the report, Feras, one of the things that we find is that only 30% of VCs are supporting, actually 25% of current investors are actively supporting their startups in their portfolio. That's a really tiny, tiny amount. Simultaneously, we also see from the statistics, 50% of the respondents had their funding round affected by COVID. And the subset of answers is kind of quite a range. VCs decided to postpone, are being more selective, no longer interested in their sector, squeezing valuations. But this is affecting 50% of respondents, right? And so if this is not addressed from, whether you want to trickle down the solution from government or however which way, a lot of businesses could go under when they run out of capital. And we've also seen from the report, the majority of companies have less than 6 months of capital. So how do you expect COVID to affect the fundraising environment? Will the fund of funds continue, especially given the significant budget cuts that we're seeing across the board? Saudi Arabia announced $8 billion of budget cuts. UAE is cutting, everybody is cutting budgets. So will this affect the fund of funds? And what can the government do to keep the money flowing in this ecosystem? So Feras, I'm going to start with you. How is this affecting the fundraising environment? What are you doing to support the startups? And then we'll go to you, Simon, with the Waha Fund of Funds. What's been going on with that, and how do we keep the money flowing? Feras.
Thank you, Ammar, and congratulations on launching the report. I'll take your first question on what have we been doing or what have funds been doing. I think the first course of action for any fund is to assess their own portfolio initially, see what's happening in their portfolio, see who they need to help, and try to assess where the problems will arise, or where the winners will really kind of take off because of the situation. So we've been doing a lot of that. We speak to our portfolio companies, daily, weekly, as much as necessary. We've been trying to support in several different ways. Now, the reality is, capital on the private side, capital is finite. So we'd love to be able to help everyone, but ultimately you may not be able to do so. And the situation as it is going to be prolonged. So we're trying to kind of assess before we deploy. Now, that being said, we have been deploying, and we've been deploying to some of our portfolio companies, doing bridge rounds where necessary. But not that stuff isn't really publicized anyway. But furthermore, I think it's really just about shoring up some companies initially, and then looking for the opportunities as they arise. So we've been really trying to engage with the founders of the businesses, trying to help even get them to speak to one another and share best practice. So it's just kind of sharing experience.
You smell blood in the water. Are you after distressed companies? Are you after hard bargains?
No. I mean, I don't think anyone really wants to benefit in that sense from this situation. I think what we do see is I think a lot of people are absolutely going to benefit from it.
Some people will benefit. Acknowledge that.
Some people will definitely benefit, but it's not the core focus, right? I mean, particularly when you have your own portfolio of companies. We've got 44 portfolio companies. We're worried about shoring up our own companies initially anyway. It's not about kind of this kind of like being bloodsuckers and trying to find the companies that are really suffering. That's not the core focus of any fund that I speak to. It's really just about kind of assessing your own situation initially.
And how do you feel? How is the mood among LPs changed? Are they ready to write? Are they? I mean, I just know that 6 months ago, so many people were raising funds, and now I'm just curious, are there going to be any more funds? Are the LPs going to write any checks?
I think everybody is more cautious across the board, you know, and that starts with government all the way down, right? But essentially, it will come back. It'll come back, and it just takes time. Nobody wants to deploy into a situation where you can't see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. So I think it's the first few weeks are just kind of figuring it out, and then we'll see how it goes from there. LPs are cautious, funds are cautious, rightfully so. It's a situation that we don't know when we'll see the end of it. But there is deployment. I mean, there is deployment, not to the level that it was. I think, obviously we peaked there a couple months ago. But it will come back. The digital economy is booming in some senses. There are some companies that are not doing so well, but some whole industries are changing. So it's not just this current boom, right? There's a shift. There's a consumer shift happening. In groceries and gaming and all of these things, if you've tried that now, if you tried grocery shopping online, for instance, you may never go back to going to the store. So there's whole industries that will benefit from this, and so the digital economy will continue to boom, and investors will look for opportunities in that space.
And you're totally right. About 18% of the startups expressed an increase in demand, and about 3% such an increase in demand that they are literally struggling to keep up. So certainly there are companies that are benefiting, but when we look at the broadest range of the numbers, we saw about 75% to 80% struggling, 15 to 20% are the ones that are really booming. And the question of how long it will take to come back may mean life or death for a lot of these companies. So while investors are being cautious today, and rightfully so, that's fair, but if these startups don't get money in the next few months, they're going out of business, whether people feel cautious or not. So, but I'll move to Simon. Simon, Feras was saying, this cautiousness is starting at the government and trickling down. And so what's going on with the fund of funds? How do you see the sovereigns playing a role? Are they going to continue to play a role as a significant LP for funds? And what is it going to take to recover? How's Waha doing?
Well, Waha's still in place, is still there. But I think there is a bit of a wait and see attitude, as Feras says. People are waiting to see how long this is going to last, who the winners, who the losers are going to be. And from the perspective of the government, it's very much about relief measures for sustaining existing businesses, rather than perhaps providing seed funding for relatively new businesses. So when we're talking to companies, there are clearly a few winners and some companies that are really struggling. But as we discussed, there are some sectors that have tremendous potential. What we're seeing in Bahrain is an acceleration of the digitalization process, an acceleration of the diversification from oil and gas and so on that's been going on for many years. So certain sectors, whether it's edutech, health tech, e-commerce, these sectors are really doing quite well at the moment.
But do you think that in overall, the budget cuts across GCC governments, driven by the low price of oil, the economic impact, all of these, this perfect storm of challenges, is this going to also hit the startup ecosystem? Are we going to see cuts in government programs? Are we going to see cuts in other activities as a result of budget cuts at the highest level?
Well, I'm afraid yes. I mean, everybody's going to be affected by this. Everybody already has been affected by this. And I'm afraid the startup ecosystem is not immune from this. But there's still a tremendous commitment from Bahrain's side to get behind Startup Bahrain, to support the ecosystem going forward. As we think this is the future of Bahrain. We can't take a step back from this.
Just last question. Do you think it will shift the appetite of governments to be LPs, to be institutional investors, whether positively or negatively?
Yes, I do, but I think that will take place in a few months' time. It's not going to happen right now. Right now, everybody's focusing on immediate relief measures. But in 6 months, when we start to see light at the end of this tunnel, I think there will be a switch towards that.
And a switch towards it in the positive direction. People will come back with an appetite. You don't think that this will diminish the government's long-term appetite to play a role as a sovereign LP?
No.
Okay. Dr. Mazin, what do you think? I think a lot of questions apply to you. And Saudi Arabia has honestly been the most vocal about its budget cuts. We've seen an increase of VAT from 5% to 15%, which has everybody kind of scared about consumer demand, the impact on spending. These are huge, huge shifts. Is this going to get to the startup ecosystem? Is the government going to continue to spend aggressively? How is this going to affect that?
I think, Omar, when it comes to investment, Saudi has, even during this pandemic, has proven that it is a powerhouse of investment. I mean, you've heard about PIF, and they're investing everywhere around the world in different companies. In the last couple of weeks, LPs or government funds are actually very active right now in Saudi. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot of great announcements very soon. One thing is how we look at it is I think it's an amazing time to invest. Startups have proven here in Saudi, and we've seen a couple of them raising funds and raising rounds of investment. We have many companies coming into the kingdom, and I'm not just trying to give a good, like the beautiful picture. There are challenges. It's not easy. There are companies that are going to suffer, companies that are going to shut down. But I think one thing that we've been focusing on in MISA is, even when we're bringing different startups into the kingdom, we were always looking at companies that were able to scale, have received initial investment. So it wasn't for any company that wants to set up in Saudi. And usually when a startup wants to set up in Saudi, they would have to have an endorsement from a VC or an angel group or these type of investors. So I think working on that and being able to bring at least, let's say, potential winners into the Saudi market, that helped a lot in kind of having kind of, let's say, they were able to manage because they had the funding and everything, and they have the support from the government and also from their investors. But going back, I think this is just for a period of time. I mean, even when you see how the Saudi government is investing in different other sectors like tourism and entertainment, and this proves that the government believes that we will overcome this. It's just for a month, for a 2, for 3, however long it takes, but things will pick off again. One unique thing that we have, and I think this has been supporting all the startups in Saudi, especially the ones that are relevant, is that the market, it's still a huge market. It's still, there is a lot of high potential there. Even when you're talking about with the VAT and everything that's happening in the Qais, is still the majority of employees in Saudi are government employees, and their salaries has not been touched, and it will not be touched anyway. So still you have that purchasing power. Yes, one of the things is behavior will change in the way how people will look at using different applications, how to buy, learn online, or even obtain healthcare. But I think, based on just what I see, is that with a strong education sector, we have the largest number of education institutes in the MENA region, the largest capital market, and the largest budget when it comes even to healthcare. This shows that, especially at these sectors, there's huge opportunities for entrepreneurs. Simon also talked about digitization, and this is very important, I think, also for all countries. In the same time, we believe that this, I'm usually accused that I'm very optimistic, but this hopefully will go through it together. And we've been working very tight with all our partners. So we've been working with all our partners. We're trying to support them and help them into overcome this situation. And we're very optimistic about the future. I mean, capital is there. We've got amazing talent in MENA region. It's an amazing market. I think you're totally right. Look, I think you're totally right in that the fundamentals for a long-term industry are there. The biggest concern for me is that everyone's saying everyone's taking a wait and see approach. And my concern is that by the time we wait and see, the vast majority of these businesses will be, and welcome to Lebanon, where the electricity just cut. At least I have my internet connection on a UPS, so I'm still here with you guys. Okay. So extra special problems that we're working on here in Lebanon, but
one other thing I wanted to tackle, right? And which is to say, Dr. Mazin, you've been working very hard to attract the best startups from around the region to open up in Saudi. Simon, EDB, BDB, same thing, to attract the best startups to Bahrain. And now we're seeing, across the world maybe, and this is a philosophical question, a return to more nationalistic support, more nationalized value chains, more localization. And you both mentioned programs that support locals and to a certain extent support locals, vis-a-vis their competitor that's coming from outside, which doesn't feel like an equal playing ground anymore. And so do we expect to see more nationalism in these programs? And how are these companies really going to compete if there's so much support for local?
I don't think we're really seeing nationalism in this support. The electricity fees that are being waived apply to all companies. The salaries that are being paid for Bahrainis, of course, helps both foreign companies that employ Bahrainis as well as Bahraini-owned companies. The fact that the LMRA, the visas for foreign nationals and expats in Bahrain are also being waived, those fees are being waived. This benefits all companies, whether you're local or a foreign-owned business. So there's no nationalism here. The other point to make is that actually, we're finding new ways of working. A lot of the accelerators are going to have to do virtual demo days, but that means they're not restricted to only pitching to angel investors and VCs that are physically located here. Suddenly, if we can really work this right, startups can feed into much broader international networks. So I don't think it's really a narrow nationalist play at the moment. I think it could actually open up for startups beyond even this region.
Okay. I agree with Simon. I mean, all the packages and incentives and everything has been given to Saudi companies, whether owned by foreign investors, foreign entrepreneurs, or local entrepreneurs. It's the same. One thing is that I think the government is all governments in the region. They're putting their efforts into managing this crisis, doing an amazing job, to trying to mitigate the risk and introducing different programs, etc. However, startups also have to do their part. You cannot 100% count on the governments to do everything. They're trying to launch different stimulus packages. They're trying to delay payments. They're trying to remove fines and fees and different things. But startups as well have to be smart in how to manage their cash flow. They have to be smart in how to pivoting. So most of it goes back on them. I believe what I've seen is that a lot of VCs have been giving a lot of attention to their portfolio companies. They're giving a lot of attention and trying to help them. Many of them have reached out to us with some concerns or issues or difficulties that their portfolio companies are facing. And at the end, this is a very strange situation that's hit the whole world. But I think we're getting a bit of a sense of it right now. So at the beginning, everybody was more terrified, scared. Now seeing that, especially the numbers in the GCC and the MENA are not that bad when it comes to the number of cases and COVID-19. There is some kind of, to some limit, there is some control. But I think at this time, everybody understands what's happening. Everybody understands what's going to happen the next couple of, you can predict it from now. So startups have to play kind of also a role in managing how they're going to manage their startup, what they're going to do, and like large businesses, like governments, like everybody else.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mazin. Certainly, all of our questions here are not to remove any of the responsibility. Those guys, they know that the buck stops with them at the end of the day. And if they run out of money, unfortunately, these days, fewer and fewer people can help them. We want to try to make that safety net as big as possible because we're also invested in the success of these companies, not only for their success, but for the success of our economies. And yet at the same time, really at the end of the day, it's going to be on them whether they're going to be able to survive or fail. Feras, I just want to give you any opportunity to comment on this, whether it's the budget cuts and how it might affect the ecosystem, or about operating across borders and how that might be affected, and we'll wrap up with that just because I'm mindful of all of our time.
I mean, the budget cuts will definitely affect the funding for startups going forward. I mean, if there's less engagement or less investment from governments, there's less of a trickle down effect into the VCs and then into ultimately into the startups. So I mean, definitely there will be that impact. But I think like Simon mentioned and Dr. Mazin mentioned, this may be potentially just a temporary thing until we see what comes of this in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But I think everyone is. I mean, all the governments in the region are well aware that the digital economy is here to stay, and they want to enable it. So I mean, I'm sure that they will find the right policies that will have a positive impact on the whole ecosystem, because it's like you mentioned, to everyone's benefit ultimately. And so everybody wants the best. So I think we wait and see what happens over the next few months. In the meantime, we continue to support our companies. We continue to engage with our founders, and like you said, I mean, it's going to force everyone to tighten their belts a bit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that's prolonged, then that becomes an issue. But if it's just a couple of months, it's just kind of skimming things down a bit. Obviously the real the sad thing is to see people lose their jobs. But we'll see how we can bounce back. I mean, we're also trying to be the companies that have let go of people to other companies that are still hiring. So. I think everyone does as much as they can at this time.
Thanks, Feras. I'm going to actually ask if the rest of the panelists are still with us, if you could turn on your computer. I'm going to ask a question and I want you to vote with your hands. So since everyone's been talking about this period of instability and then, hey, the benefits of work from home, right? Kids appear in the Zoom shots. So we've been talking about a period of instability and then kind of this light at the end of the tunnel. Things are going to stabilize, programs are going to pick up again. Where people are going to start to invest more freely. They're going to feel more comfortable investing. So Feras, you've said the number 3, 4, 5, 6 months. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So maybe I'll take votes, right? So if you think it is at least 3 months, raise your hand. Then at least 6 months, raise your hand. Then we'll do 9 months, 12 months. I'm not going to go beyond 12 months for now. But if you think at least 3 months, raise your hand. At least 6 months. Okay. At least 6 months, at least 12 months. Does anyone believe that this is going to be 12 months or more? Okay, so between 3 to 6 months is roughly the time period that our panelists think that this period of cloudy visibility is going to be. Thank you all for joining us. A real pleasure to speak with you all, and thanks for all of your hard work to support the ecosystem. Wamda, it's been a pleasure working with you on this report. We hope that you'll help us spread the word about the report. The report will be available for download. We'll be sending out more and more communication about it. Thank you all to the attendees for joining us, and best of luck with everyone through these challenging times.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Before